I see how much you produce for the Detroit Football Network. I'm a fan of your work for a while now, and I like that you've gone off on your own. So although you're a writer and you're used to writing about other people, I do want to start with you for a second and talk about kind of your decision to go on your own and how that's going so far.
Well, I mean, I guess the simplest way to put it is it's going really well. Just celebrated a year anniversary of the launch of my independent publication. And, I think your listeners can probably relate to reaching a point professionally where maybe you don't feel valued in the workplace the way that you think you are, in terms of your production to salary. And I had some conversations with my employers at the time, and I totally understand it. They had some budgetary restrictions, and print media is not necessarily in the best place in this day and age financially. And so, I certainly never wanted to have my financial ambitions impact other employees. That was certainly never the goal. And so when I realized that, my ambitions were not congruent with what the paper could do, I decided to test my value independently. And I had backup plans and other offers outside the industry, but I truly love what I do, and believe that even though the product is what drives readership, the Lions are what drive readership. I'd like to think that I had developed over the last decade plus, a special relationship with the audience and being in tune with them, delivering the news and the analysis and, what little personality that I inject into my writing. I connected with them. And so that was the bet that I made. Had to convince the wife, obviously, that was a good idea to drop my salary to zero and see what would happen. But, it has, the bet has paid off. Let's just put it that way.
Big time. And I'm glad it has. I've talked to a lot of writers on the show, especially a lot of Lions writers. I think I'm probably in the 20s at this point for different writers and content creators on the Lions beat. And yeah, I feel like you might have one of the most complete systems. You don't have any of that infrastructure like you're talking about. You don't have the previous iteration of print media and all of the people working with you. It's just basically you churning out content, and it's very complete content. So we'll plug it more at the end, but I just wanted to do that on the way in and talk to Justin about that, because it's cool to see somebody betting on himself and it paying off. But you're here to talk about the Lions. There's a lot to talk about with the Lions. One of the things that I wanted to do to highlight some of your writing is I've had some people ask me about, we try to go a little bit more in depth here. And one of the pieces that I've liked, the series that you're doing right now, is kind of talking about the assistant coaches and the new faces, because one of the toughest parts for football is there's so many different people in the process. You've got the 53-man roster, you've got the coaches, you've got the general manager, you got the owner, you got so many people involved, and it's hard to kind of do a pie chart of who does what, who's responsible for what. There's so many things that impact each other. You've got defensive tackles taking heat off of linebackers so that they can charge the quarterback, rush the quarterback properly. There's all sorts of effects like that in the coaching staff and the different units of football. But I'm curious what you've learned with the different pieces. I know you've only done a couple so far, but I'd like to kind of cover those a little bit and see what you've learned about the incoming assistant coaches, because that's the big storyline so far this year. Johnson being out, John Morton coming in, and how that change is going, but also it's impacted by a lot of these assistant coaches that you're highlighting as well.
I think you take a step back and you look at how many coaches the Lions lost this offseason, and lost to promotions. These are guys that are climbing the ranks, and two coordinators become head coaches, and they kind of bring up and elevate some of the other assistants. Hank Fraley was in the conversation for an offensive coordinator position, and so you have to identify that this is a coaching tree that Dan Campbell is creating, and something we've never been able to say about a Lions coach, really. And so I think back to 2022, where I had the opportunity to sit down with Calvin Shepard for an hour or 90 minutes. And, he was just coaching the outside linebackers at that point, was transitioning into a minor promotion to inside linebackers. And, you could see kind of the upward trajectory of his career, even though it was still very, very early. And I found it valuable to kind of get on the ground floor, if you will, on what his mindset was, what his process was, what his ambitions were. And it ended up being, really enlightening and in some ways foreshadowing conversation for what was to come for the now Lions defensive coordinator. And so, within what I do, I wrote somewhere in the ballpark of 500 to 600 stories last year. There's never a lack of content for the Detroit Lions, and there's never a lack of appetite for that content. But being independent and asking people to subscribe directly to me, I have to find unique and creative avenues so that I am not writing the same thing that my colleagues are. There are always going to be situations where things like that overlap, and you can't help it because the story of the day dictates your attention. You can't ignore it. But, where do you fill in the gaps and do something that's unique and interesting and different? And so, I pitch ideas constantly for stories to the Lions where I require their help in providing the access to individuals that don't, normally talk to the media. And one of the ideas I pitched them this year that was taken to Campbell was, I highlight the lower level assistants on the staff, people that, never get recognized, never get talked to, and just kind of bringing to light to a fan base, like these guys that work in the background that are part of the 20 plus person coaching staff that are kind of helping the process come along. And what do they do? What are their ambitions? Where did they come from? How did they get here? And so you're right. I've only done 2 so far. It's a new series. I published the first one during the summer break. Just posted a new one last week on Bruce Kradkowski, which NFL fans will remember as a 10-year backup, played in Toledo. So there's a name brand recognition, but what brought him here? And I learned some things during that conversation. I learned that he worked for Pro Football Focus for 3 years, grading quarterbacks behind the scenes and studying offensive systems. I learned, where he recognized that coaching was a potential path for him as a backup quarterback in Cincinnati with a young Andy Dalton and a young Marvin Jones and AJ Green, where he was running these meetings and helping these rookies get acclimated to life in the NFL, to how to prepare for an opponent. I learned that Sean McVay was interested before, he landed this opportunity in Detroit. And so you learn these unique things about these individuals and, the potential trajectory similar to Shepard. You're getting in on the ground floor with these guys that if all things go well and the Lions continue to be a perennial contender, you get to come back to this and say, yeah, I remember when I talked to that guy and now he's offensive coordinator for the 49ers or whatever. And so, got an off day tomorrow, bring us back to the beginning of the conversation, and got the third interview for that series lined up for 7:45 in the morning. Good way to use the off day.
Nice. I like it. That's a good tease, and that definitely contradicts the whole lazy day thing. So I figured we would do that at some point in the interview. But yeah, I thought that was a great article there about Gradkowski. I didn't know about the Pro Football Focus piece either, and it's just interesting to see these people's roots and see how much experience they do have, because I think people have a tendency to focus on, okay, Johnson, he's gone, this person's gone, but it's a twofold effect. This is maybe the first time in pretty much the whole era that you've covered the Lions where they've had this kind of turnover where they're actually losing people. That's one of the quote unquote negatives of being a good team, that people want part of their culture, part of their success, and they do want to take those promotions. And we can't blame Ben Johnson and others, Aaron Glenn, for taking those promotions. But I also think it's easier to get other coaches that are on the rise and get more experienced folks. And they do have a decent amount of those types of guys on this staff. So it's a double-edged sword. I think they'll be able to reload because I think the culture emanates from Campbell and Holmes, but this will be the first season that kind of tests that.
Yeah, and certainly not the first time I've covered coaching staff turnovers, but first time I've covered it in a positive regard.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? Like, how many times have I had to cover a coaching search in January? More than I'd like to admit. And so it is refreshing covering it from a different perspective. And you're right, those guys did earn those opportunities. And I think you've nailed it on the head, right? The culture is at a all-time high right now in Detroit. People want to play for Dan Campbell. They want to work for Dan Campbell. He puts them in positions to succeed. And, that's kind of part of what this series digs in as well, is why did you want to be here? What did you heard? What have your experiences shown you, whether you've been here for the duration, like a guy like Steve Oliver, an assistant offensive line coach, or a guy like August Mangan, who came in this offseason, or Bruce Gradkowski that came in this offseason. What have you seen just in your 3-4 months here comparative to your other coaching stops that, what makes Detroit special or different or unique?
Justin, I wanted to talk with you about Friday because you guys did a good job covering it across the board, but not that you ever want something like that to happen, but I did like the response of the human element of the game, because I think we lose that when these guys put on helmets and uniforms and literally look uniform, and you're forced to interact with the players and know them on a deeper level. So I just wanted to get kind of your take and assessment of what happened, because you're about as close in proximity to these players. You're doing a lot of interviews. You're in and out of the locker room. You're at training camp. I'm just curious what your sense of what happened on Friday was.
Yeah, it's the second time actually in the Dan Campbell era that we've kind of experienced a scene like Friday night with a player suffering a really terrifying injury. You can go back to 2021 with cornerback Savion Smith very early in the New England game, threw a jam into tight end Hunter Harvey and collapsed. And it looked fairly innocuous at first viewing, but becomes really quickly scary as you see the way players react on the field. That game stopped for, I believe, 9-10 minutes. Same thing, brought an ambulance onto the field. His father happened to be in the stands. His father was put in the ambulance, and you don't know in the moment the severity of it. You don't know if a player's just been knocked out, which I say just, but unfortunately that's the best case scenario sometimes in these things. You don't know if it's a concussion or, certainly there are plenty of examples of full-on paralysis in this game. And so, excuse me, when Norris goes down the way he did, and you watch the replay and you see the way his neck and his head kind of snap as he collides with the ball carrier there, you don't know. You don't know if this is simply a concussion, which again, not a great injury ever, but an accepted part of the game, or if it's something, much more tragic. And so, this happened in the fourth quarter, a little bit different than the Savion Smith injury, which occurred in the first quarter of a regular season game. And, those guys are forced to kind of resume play and, kind of bury the emotions of the moment, which I think is extraordinarily difficult. This occurred in the fourth quarter of a preseason game. I will tell you that I was kind of appalled with the way the NFL handled it. I don't think it had to get to the point where the players were lodging what I would call a silent protest by snapping the ball and letting 7 minutes run off the clock and refusing to play. I think we need to see a reevaluation of how the league handles these situations, because you're asking men to go back to war, if you will, figuratively, after they've lost a brother, in the heat of battle. And so that is a really, really difficult thing to do. Your head is not in it. Your heart is not in it. And so good on the NFL for eventually calling the game, but I'd like to see a situation where, both head coaches can confirm with the official on the field that, yes, we have no interest in continuing this one. There's very little to be gained by playing an extra 13 minutes of preseason football. Let these guys emotionally reset and process what they're going through, because it is a very, very difficult situation when you don't know the health of your teammate that you're spending hours upon hours on end, day after day after day, week after week, and really forging this bond.
I think that's all well said and great points in there. If you don't have Morris and Campbell as the coaches, that could go differently. Plus, I'm sure you've thought of this, but I thought of it while you were talking about that. You add in a risk of injury because people are out of they're out of their minds. They're not really thinking. They're not focused properly on the game. And so you could have another injury then. And then what happens with a second injury because somebody's not really paying as good of attention as they were or could. And so, yeah, I agree with you that I think these types of things force the NFL to then reflect, and then they're a very reactive league, as you know, for a lot of these types of things. So hopefully that means that in the next situation, which you never hope will happen, but with the aggressiveness and the impact of the sport, it's likely to happen at some point. Hopefully they'll have some systems in place based on what happened here.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen, even in the regular season, games stopped. And obviously the primary example is the DeMar Hamlin cardiac arrest event from 3 years already. But, that game was far more important. It was two playoff-bound teams, playoff implications, and the league knew it was right to stop that game. And I understand that Norris didn't die on the field, if you will, but you still didn't know how serious it was. And you're right. Like, if one guy is not mentally in it and can't focus, or his mindset is clouded by emotion, and maybe a guy on the other team is, able to move past it and is flying around full speed, the risk of, something negative happening in a collision between those two it's just not worth it. It's not.
Especially for preseason, but like you said, regular season doesn't matter. It's not worth the health of the players. But yeah, well said, and I appreciate you covering that. I want to get your thoughts on who's kind of sticking out to you with all the camp and all the analysis you are doing. I listened to I think the first podcast that you guys did. I enjoyed the podcast. You guys had some guys on there that stuck out to you. That we're hearing one name when I bring up who's interesting. I interview beat writers from the opposing teams, so I'll talk to somebody from the Falcons and the who's up next here, the Dolphins here, and get their thoughts on this. But I'm curious what your thoughts are, because there's one name that keeps on coming up.
Well, I imagine it's one of the two receivers, and both of them merit conversation in Jamison Williams and Isaac Tesla. Hopefully I didn't butcher that for your West Michigan audience. I'm still working on the pronunciation of the rookie receiver. But both those guys have just jumped off the tape, and I've had, a really hard time kind of explaining this, and I've said it in a few places, like the transformation of Jamison Williams over the course of 2 years has been kind of mind-blowing. This was a guy that, you were worried about the trajectory of becoming a bust after 2 seasons. And, that was furthered when he starts his third season with a gambling suspension, or the second season with a gambling suspension. And so he had major drop issues. He had, just a wildness to his routes when in a league that just demands efficiency and precision. And you just didn't know if he was going to be able to corral this chart busting athleticism and become the talent that he could be. last year was good. It was a really nice positive step in the right direction. It was a 1,000-yard season on an offense that had a lot of weapons. He was a complementary piece. He was a deep threat. He did what they needed him to do. But, if you took away all the pieces and put him in a vacuum, he still wasn't a number one receiver. He didn't have the well-rounded skill set to be, a guy you could build an offense around. And he's come into this camp, and it's really tough to explain how big of a jump he has made in terms of the precisions of his routes, the timing, the hands, the showing late hands on deep balls that, disguise when it's arriving to the defender, making it harder to break up. And if you think about a guy with elite deep speed, that you have to be on your heels as a defender, protecting against that at all times. And now you add into the fact that he can stop on a dime and come back to the quarterback and do it with the precision required to have the timing and the chemistry with the quarterback that he's going to be in the right spot when you put that ball, where he's supposed to be. That is an impossible challenge for a cornerback to defend, to know that Williams could be coming back to the ball or he'd be going deep. You have to make almost a decision pretty early in that route of which you're going to defend. And if you pick wrong, you suffer the consequences, because once the ball is in his hands, good luck. And then with Tesla, this is a guy that you wondered, and I think reasonably so, what level of developmental arc did he need to become a contributor? This is a guy that was at Hillsdale College a couple of years ago, and that's, certainly not a logical progression in most cases to the NFL. He goes to Arkansas, he gets some of that SEC experience, he contributes there, but he's got a very caged and limited role, a lot of slot reps that, just not the full expanse of the route tree. And so now he's going to the NFL, and we go back to that conversation about precision and doing all the little things right. And you're like, okay, well, how long is it going to take? Is it going to take a year? They have a year. They've got enough pieces where they don't need him. So maybe, this develops on the practice field, similar to some of the other developmental guys they brought in. And he's really skipped over a lot of that. He's proven to be a very quick study. He does a lot of the little things right. Is there still development to happen? Absolutely. He's a young player. That's true of any young player, but to think that he won't contribute as a rookie now is, I think, foolish. I think he is going to be a piece of this offense. I don't know how many yards or how many catches that looks like, probably in the ballpark of 300 to 500, but 300 to 500 is certainly more than I think we initially expected when they called his name on draft night.
It'll be interesting to watch both of those guys. Yeah, Tesla's the main one, and I did get schooled by him on air. I interviewed him actually in the draft process, so he gave me a breakdown of his name. It was a really good interview with him, and I can see why he appealed to the Lions. I said that in the interview, that he profiled well as a potential replacement for Patrick. That was quite obvious by talking with him, and he had the right mindset, talked about blocking, all of that kind of stuff. So it's fun to see him, especially being, like you said, a local product and doing well here with all the eyes on him, especially with the trade value that was given up for him. So I appreciate you coming on and talking with us here. I know you have a lot of things going, so I appreciate you taking the time, and tell people about all the great things that you have going, because it's all worth following here.
Well, we talked about it a little bit on the front end, but my publication is called the Detroit Football Network. You can find it at detroitfootball.net. It is a subscriber-based publication. We have both a free tier and a paid tier. I would say about half of my content is free. Anything that comes from a group setting, a press conference, a scrum interview, game stories, the basic Lions coverage you would come to expect on a day-to-day basis from any publication, that's going to be free. And then, more of the in-depth analysis, the profiles, the film reviews, the deep dives into coaches, the features, that's where, I try to provide a depth and a value for those who are, a different level of fan. I'm writing to the most passionate of the fan base, and I'm very in tune with the audience. I converse with my audience regularly, and they help shape what I do. And I've tried to keep my prices very reasonable because I know everybody has the decisions to make with how they spend their money. I've tried to keep it, I like to say, cheaper than a fast food meal, which is kind of a lot of things these days, but $8 a month, $80 a year. And like I said, it's going very well. And, I've leaned heavily on the feedback of my audience to make sure that I'm delivering on expectations. And, that feedback has been humbling in a lot of ways.
I think you've delivered in a big way, and I'm a fan. I'm one of your followers on there and stuff, and I urge everybody else to do that. But and you can see the amount of knowledge that Justin has on the interview here. So be sure to follow all of that stuff he has going, and hopefully we can get you back on the show at some point when you can make some more time for us. But I appreciate you coming on, and we'll look forward to following your great coverage throughout the season here.
Well, thanks for having me, Ryan. I appreciate all the kind words.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by
Harry Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Grand Management Group, Encore Business Group, and Rydan Investments.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.
Stay informed and stay vigilant.